All right, AP Hug, we are going to jump our way into. I'm going to see if we can maybe like hit about like three slides here. I think that'll keep us in a pretty good place to be where we need to be to wrap things up on this unit in the not too distant future. So we finished up down there with the suburbanization of businesses. That's where we're talking about all those strip malls and kind of all those eating places that you can find in pretty much any city across the country, things like that. And when we talk about that suburbanization, that is typically what we're seeing. All right, and like I said, man, plenty of it in the Vancouver area. Some of it you see on the way kind of out to Camas and yeah, all that kind of thing. All right, so let's go ahead and jump from there because I think we got that pretty well covered. And we'll look at yeah, there you go, self-titled there, political organization. Sec here. All right, sorry about that. And had a dog disruption. Okay, so political organization cities. Let's jump into it. All right, so when we hear that word city, here's how I want you to kind of organize it because this term municipality really throws people off. It's like, and so when you think of a city, think of it. It's like the geographic area. You've got a population. You've got your neighborhoods, all that kind of stuff, that sort of thing. I mean, there you go. There's your city. You might have your central business district, and whatever your model is going to be that you're working off of. But the geography and the people who live within that geography, that makes up the city. Okay, municipality is part of a city, but that gets into the elements of it where, like it says there, it talks about services that are provided. Okay, and when I say government, I mean the government, the city. All right, because cities are kind of running their own little mini government in the way that they operate city. You have the mayor, and a city council, that kind of a thing. So when we talk about a municipality, we're talking about like when I say services, I mean like public safety. Okay, so fire and police, that's part of the municipality. The sewer department, okay, that make sure that all the underground sewage lines are working properly and that kind of thing. Garbage service, okay, to make sure that you're not getting any kind of pile up of messes, things like that. Those are all examples of municipality, okay. The water supply that supplies all of that kind of gets in there. And so kind of understand the difference between those. All right. Just one being the basic idea of the land and the people itself, and the other, all the services that a city is expected. And it's when you live within a city, usually you pay additional taxes to that city, and that's what you're getting in return for your taxes. Okay. Is those services that take care of you, make sure that you live in a community that is safe and is clean, and that when you turn the water on, that you don't have to worry about the quality of the water, and when you flush the toilet, everything's going away somewhere and it's going to be treated properly. All of that, okay. All right, moving on. Annexation, and again, you're seeing all the vocab terms popping up here. And annexation is when you have this can happen both voluntarily and hostile. And when here, let me pop this down. Actually, okay, we'll kind of get this in here. Annexation is when a city wants to add more land. Okay, you might have some land that lies right beyond the borders or boundaries of a city, and it doesn't belong to another city. It's what we call an unincorporated piece of territory. And some of you very likely may live in an unincorporated piece of land. You might live in a neighborhood or an area that doesn't technically belong to any city at all. Okay, you live in the county, and so if you have need for services, you're doing everything directly through the county, right? That's an unincorporated. And a lot of times when cities want to grow, when they want to increase their tax base, and this is the big part of it, it's like, well, why does the city want to grow? Because they want to add more population, and everyone that they add to that population now is going to be paying taxes to the city. And that allows the city to continue to grow and to have the funding they need to keep providing all of these services. All right. So when that goes on, a lot of times you're gonna find people in different positions, and sometimes with that annexation, people want to be annexed. Okay, maybe they're because they're out there in an unincorporated area, they're not feeling very safe, or there's not enough fire department protection for them, things like that. and they actually want to join a city, and they're willing to pay the taxes so that they have better access to services. Okay, that's that kind of voluntary annexation. But then you have also circumstances where they want to go after a chunk of land and add it to their city, and the people who live there don't want any, they have no business in doing that. They're like, no, we're fine. We're fine. Just leaning back on county services, for example. We don't need, nor do we want to be part of your city. Right? That's that involuntary that I'm talking about, or hostile, I guess is the word I threw out there. And so that term incorporation is sometimes what an unincorporated area will do. In other words, they kind of form up a new city. Okay? It's like, fine, we're not gonna be annexed by you. We're going to incorporate and we're going to create our own city. All right, and that is something that happens from time to time as well. Right. I'd tell you a story about that, but again, I'm trying to keep things moving about that. But I lived in an area at one time that was stuck in that same thing. City wanted to annex it, and us living where we lived didn't want to be annexed. And so in the end, we incorporated. All right, we took a vote, and people said, "Yeah, let's form our own little town," and off it goes. Right? Look at those Bitmoji pictures of me from a few years back. It's like, oh yes, the Mr. Floyd without a beard. All right, so there we go. Let's see, what do we got here? Beyond city municipal. Yeah, so they're going back to what I guess I have things kind of backwards here. But there's your unincorporated areas, right? So you're beyond the borders of a city. You're beyond the borders of a municipality. Okay, you are living in an unincorporated area. You can go home and and ask your parents, hey, do we live really in a city? Because you might have a city address. That doesn't always mean you live in the city, within the city boundaries or borders. Sometimes you just go with that because it's the nearest and it's what the mail service uses so that you get your mail. All right. Okay. Let's move it along here. Population and urban areas. Okay. So getting back to some of our stuff from Unit 4, we talked about this census tracts and census blocks. When it comes to how an urban area is going to be kind of divided up, and again, we're thinking politically here. That is kind of what they usually talk about is a census tract is going to be kind of an area that's going to be between a population of about 4,000 to 12,000. And then they divide the census tract further down into these blocks. And those kind of vary in size. Some of them might be very urban, some of them might be a little bit more rural. But it's a way of politically starting to kind of organize things down, even kind of into smaller areas. Okay. From there, keep it moving here. They create these tracks and these blocks to kind of be able to have a better organization of the urban area, and also by having that better organization, being able to get more feedback from the people that live in there. And so that's where we get our qualitative and quantitative data. Okay, qualitative data is what and we I think we've been in this area before back in one of our prior units. But qualitative is the kind of data you get by going out and maybe sending people around, knocking on doors and asking residents questions. Okay, maybe considering a new park, and we want to get some feedback from people. Okay, I think about what we were watching on the urbanized video. And the lady who was putting all the stickers on the windows, and getting, I mean, there's some qualitative data going on there where you're getting that direct feedback from the population. Okay. Quantitative data is numbers based, right? Just like we've learned about before. And so that's where you're kind of breaking down and looking at crime statistics, population growth rates or decline rates. You're looking at those. Everything is statistical. Everything is numerical values. And you're using that to kind of, give you some guidance on whatever kind of planning you're doing for your community. All right. And number 3 is kind of self-explanatory. Okay, cities and the municipalities that operate the cities, they focus a lot on both kinds of data, so that they're asking for tax dollars from you. They better be giving you something in return. And so for them to understand what it is you need, there you go, qualitative, quantitative data, and using those census tracts and blocks as a way of kind of organizing how they go out and seek out that data. All right. Okay. Part 3, we are moving on into urban challenges. Part 3 of Unit 6. Okay. And this is actually, I think, part 3 and part last that we're taking on here. So we are going to focus on Roman numeral 1. I'm restarting the Roman numerals. Economic problems that we might have in cities. Some of these we saw in some of the cities that we traveled to in the urbanized video. So let's break it down, okay? So inner cities. This kind of gets into older central business districts, okay? And usually these are ones that, kind of think about what we saw like with Detroit, where, when the auto industry ended up leaving Detroit in the 1970s, 1980s, you ended up with this really major inner city issue where you had people who were living in that inner city area of Detroit. They couldn't afford to get out. Poverty basically traps them there, and they create this underclass, what we call an underclass. And that underclass are people who, either are or at least feel like they are trapped in the poverty. And when we talk about a culture of poverty, that's when that poverty becomes generational. And so, parents have kids, their kids grow up in that poverty. And because they don't have as good of maybe educational options because they live in an environment of poverty and the schools aren't very good, they are unable to escape it. And so the cycles to the next generation. That's what we talk about when we say a culture of poverty. And a lot of times we will see that in some of those inner cities, some of the slums, squatters, settlements, those kind of areas that we see in different parts of the world. But when we talk about here in the United States, a lot of times it is that concept of those inner cities, and a lot of them are coming from big urban areas that have just become outdated. That industries like the automobile industry have failed for one reason or another. With the auto industry, that's when we started seeing more and more imported cars coming to the United States from Japan and Korea, those kinds of things. So there you go. There is all of that. And then the term brownfields, okay? It's kind of, kind of self-explanatory, although it goes beyond just talking about fields. It's just, like it says, evidence of poverty. So, buildings that are kind of falling apart and peeling paint and just, the look of neglect that goes on there, okay? That can be extended out to factories that are abandoned and just, these big empty buildings with broken out windows and, just, clearly abandoned and just, slowly crumbling apart. Okay. A lot of times, behind chain link fences to keep people out so they don't end up, injuring themselves. And so, all of it combines together as just, again, it works into that inner city. It works into that culture of poverty where everything you see around you, the environment that you live in, it all just flows back into just this, this sense of just despair and hopelessness that you get there. But that term brownfield specifically is where you have all of that visual evidence of decline. Okay, I don't know why they go with brown fields. I don't recall the exact origins of the term. And why we don't go with more like brown buildings, but anyhow, there's what it is. Okay, yeah, there's some of your examples of abandoned factory, and you get all the kind of bushes and stuff. Kind of it just yeah, it looks like it's all this stuff has seen much better days. Okay, excuse me. A filtering word popping up there again, and filtering is think about how we talked about filtering. As kind of as we see building homes, neighborhoods grow older and older, and with each successive move, you get people who probably have lower economic status who are taking over those homes because now they can afford them because the value of those homes keep declining as time marches on. And so, over time, pretty soon it's like, okay, good. Well, again, that gets into that culture of poverty, and filtering at its most extreme are going to be neighborhoods then of extremely homes that are not maintained, homes that may be not even really safe, where you have issues like broken water pipes or mold inside the homes, and rats and things like that. And so that filtering you take into kind of like the nth degree, that also can get us into that whole area of extreme poverty, right? Redlining. This is a term that goes back to, I think there's some instances of this that go back to the 30s, but it seems like also a fair amount of this after World War II. And this is where banks, this is now illegal, by the way. Redlining is illegal. It is likely something that still might happen, but when it does, technically it's illegal. And what it was is banks, who provide loans to people to buy homes, would take a look at the cities that they worked in and that operated in, and they would draw lines to parts of the city that they would provide loans to and parts of the city where they would refuse to give people loans. And usually the parts of the cities where they would refuse to give loans were the high poverty areas. And in a city like Oakland that you have pictured up here, you see these red areas, okay? Those are the areas where banks would refuse to provide any kind of loans for people to buy homes. Not a coincidence, those were also parts of Oakland where most of the population were also minorities, okay? People of color. Things like that. So there's also kind of a racial discrimination edge to redlining. And what it does is it just ensures that people that are stuck in poverty, it's one less way they can try to get out of poverty. It's like, just give me a loan so that I can, use that money to try to better my family, put myself in a better situation. And that is the bank stepping and saying, nope. If you, if we're going to give you any money, it's going to be so that you stay in these areas. We don't want you moving to these other parts of the city that people don't want you moving to. Okay, again, they're trying to get away from that whole idea of white flight and invasion and succession, and using what ends up being ruled as an illegal way of doing that. Okay. And then let's see, from there we move on to eminent domain, redevelopment. Eminent domain is where the government can step in. Let me see, do I want to make sure I don't have this broken down even in more detail? Do I? Nope, I'll just keep it right here. Where the government can step in and take over land. Okay, if local government is doing like a major road project, and they want to widen the lanes of a road so to alleviate traffic issues, they can go to property owners that are along that road and say, hey, we need to take about 20 feet of your land so that we can widen the roads, all right? And, and sometimes what they're going to do is they're going to come to you and say, we'll offer you some money for the land that you're going to lose. You're going to lose about 20 feet of the front of your property, and we'll pay you something for that, okay? And as a property owner, you can say, no, I want to keep my land, and the government of the city, whatever it is that is doing this, is pretty much going to say, well, we are declaring eminent domain here, and as long as courts will back them up on that, they can, in the end, force you to give up your land. Okay, you will be compensated for it, and you're supposed to receive, fair compensation. They can't, lowball you on the value of the land. They got to pay fair market value for it. But the government can, in fact, take your land when they can argue that it's for the betterment of the entire community. Okay, and that's where widening the roads would do this. Okay, those kinds of things. And sometimes you might even see it if there's like a major, development of, like a, major apartments that are being built to try to alleviate the housing shortage. And you'll see a city step in and declare eminent domain to make sure that happens as well. Okay. And then, redevelopment of neighborhoods, where you go into a neighborhood and maybe, tear down a bunch of old houses and start rebuilding newer ones. We'll learn before we get done with here about the term gentrification. And usually when that happens, the homes suddenly are worth a whole lot more. And so, help or hurt the poor, more often than not, it's going to end up hurting the poor, because it's going to just end up with them potentially losing their homes in a situation like eminent domain, and then with redevelopment, maybe being priced out of a neighborhood that they used to live in, because as newer homes are built around them, the value of the entire neighborhood is going to go up in terms of the taxes you're going to have to pay, and if people who are living in poverty suddenly are being expected to pay more in property taxes, that might be the last straw that they can't afford to, and they have to move, or they might have to give up a home and have to be, move into an apartment or something like that. Okay, so that is all that. All right, and then we'll just get down here to the bottom of this slide. Okay, so social and cultural problems in cities, and so we'll kind of work our way through this. So the kind of housing issues that you will see happen in a city. And we'll get through some of this, and actually we can get through this whole list. I'm just going to pop them all up here for you, okay? Because these are the three big ones we have, and this is a situation that's kind of ongoing, always happening. Okay, might be happening in the local area for us in Southwest Washington. I can guarantee it's happening somewhere. And the biggest issues are the idea of poor quality of housing. In other words, you have homes, but a lot of them are old. So kind of dilapidated, kind of falling apart, need a lot of improvement, but that costs a lot of money. That's an issue. Okay, a huge one that has been an issue here, particularly in the United States, but other countries experience this from time to time as well, and that is where you don't have enough housing to go around. And when that's the case, it's supply demand, which means the housing you do have goes up in value. Okay, economically, financially, and that is going to edge out a lot of people out of the housing market. They simply cannot afford it because there is not enough to go around. And so that's why you'll always hear, talk about, the push to try to figure out ways of providing more housing. Okay, look at all those apartments they're building next to us. Holy cow, that's going to certainly make the availability of housing in Eastern Vancouver definitely look a little better than it was before those apartments were there. They're kind of an eyesore, in my opinion, but at the same time, they're gonna probably fill up pretty quickly, I would imagine, right? And then your other housing issue there is unaffordability, and I'll just tie that right back into what I was talking about with insufficient housing. When there's not enough housing to go around, the value of the housing that is available goes up. And that the further on up it goes, the more and more people that are pushed out who simply cannot afford housing. And so those two are very, very tied together. The more supply there is, then the price is going to come down, and more people can afford homes, right? And I'll just say, when I'm talking about homes, I should expand that out, because the same thing applies to apartments, to condominiums. It's anything that people are calling. I'm not just talking about houses. It's just anything that people have that they can live in. They can call a residence. All right, there we go. All right, a little bit. I was hoping to keep this at 20 minutes. I'm at 23. My apologies. But that, again, the three slides here will put us in really good shape to finish off the unit when we get back together again. I will hit the brakes right there. Okay, and see you next time.